Hello people, it's I again. I've been looking at some of the published documents from the justice.gov website, and I came across this interesting case here. And the reason I find it interesting is the judge has actually gone into some detail with regards to what he can and can't do in relation to contempt of court. This matters about a contempt of court, so the court's ordered something, the court's directed you. Yeah, more particularly the order is how they do these things, and if you don't do the order or you disobey the court order, you can be held in contempt of court, which is as old as the hills. That's essentially the original, as far as I'm aware, the original punishment of imprisonment comes or stems from taking the Mickey out of the court's authority, whatever kind of court you may be in. Yeah, so even if you're in Mickey Mouse court of nonsense, it's still a court as far as it's concerned, and therefore you can still be held in contempt of court. So it's best sometimes to get your ass out of Mickey Mouse courts and bring it to a law court that you can obviously have your say in. But this is quite interesting. The wording that the judge is using here, when he's like thinking, it's almost like he's thinking out loud, and he's put it and it's been put down on paper, which is quite interesting. About what he's like. Oh, these are my options. I'm going to read them out. I'm going to explain them. They're going to be annotated down in this ruling, whatever it is. And it's just a nice, insightful way. And also, he goes on about what he can and can't do in the criminal realms and how the criminal remedies for contempt of court differ from the civil remedies. This is very much a civil matter. So the maximum sentence for, this is point 8 here, so the maximum sentence for contempt of court is 2 years. Now I don't know why it's set at that arbitrary figure, but it is, because I saw a program about federal courts in America where if you're like being called to a federal court to give evidence that everyone knows you have, and you don't comply with the court, you refuse to give testimony or refuse to answer a certain question, they can hold you in contempt of court for obviously delaying the process of justice, not getting in the way, redacting information, being stubborn. And they're basically like, well, if you want to be stubborn in a federal court, they'll put you in prison until you decide to change your mind. So I just thought presumably it was indefinite, but here the judge is actually saying, look, the maximum sentence for contempt of court is 2 years. Immediate imprisonment. Yeah, it's like it's literally like take him away, and I cannot go beyond that, even if I thought it was appropriate to do so. You could also look at the other video I was doing. That was about arraignment, my arraignment video. And there was that guy who back-chatted, he was standing in front of the judge. The judge says, you know what, I'm going to have to put you in prison, no bond, because of the nature of the case. Yeah, and the guy was like, hang on a minute, I was told it was just going to be a battery and I was going to be bailed and go out into the community again and turn back up for my day in court. But the judge obviously thought, you know what, I can't afford to let this guy out. The risk to the society is too great. And the guy who was being sent back to prison without being released on bail was pissed, and he said, I think he called the judge a cocksucker. And the judge didn't hear it initially. He called the guy back in, if you recall, and he says, what did that guy just call me? Hey, is there anything you want to say to me, sir? And he says, sorry, sir, I'm out of line, but I don't even know why I'm being put back in prison. It's just supposed to be, I'm supposed to be just done for battery and released again. He's basically expecting one outcome, and the judge has done a completely different outcome for him. And therefore he is extremely miffed and called the judge a cocksucker. Something you should never do. You should never call anyone a cocksucker. It's very rude. So, the judge in that instance gave him, I think it was 60 days for contempt of court for that. So if you go on that basis, and what the judge could actually have done here, anything up to 2 years imprisonment is on the table for this judge in terms of contempt of court. And the judge says, now I've given you 60 days contempt of court to that guy in the example I've given you, and he asked him, is there anything else you'd like to say? And I think he said, can I take the cocksucker back? And then the judge says, right, well, I now sentence you to another 60 days of contempt of court. So now you've got 120 days contempt of court in I think it was Nebraska prison, county prison. I was like, oh, right, interesting. So, how long do you want to play this game with the judge? You know what I mean? How long do you want to, when are you going to keep taking the piss out of me? When are you going to keep disrespecting court? How much contempt of court would you like to have? And so I don't know so the maximum sentence for contempt of court is 2 years immediate in prison. I cannot go beyond that, even if I thought that it was appropriate. So for calling a judge a cocksucker, he got only 60 days, but potentially, he could have gone a lot more gun ho with that. And and in this case, he couldn't go. He couldn't go. So he is saying he's limited by 2 years, and even if he wanted to go beyond it, he can't. And he doesn't think it's appropriate here either. He doesn't think that's an appropriate thing. Lesser punishment, because contempt of court, remember, is fine or imprisonment. Yeah, that's contempt of court. Lesser punishment can be imposed, but the alternative options available to me are limited. I could impose a suspended sentence of imprisonment or a fine, or I can make a cost order to make no further order, or I can make a combination of these orders. I'm not entirely sure what he's going on about in the later section, because from a pleb law point of view, you can either be fine or imprisonment. That's what we're aware of. If you want to be in contempt of court, then you can have a fine, or if it needs fit, if like in a case of evidence that isn't being presented to the court when they know you have it, like a document, anything that the court requires from you, and you're not giving over, and you can't plead immunity to such a thing, and they'll put you in prison to decide to comply with the court's wishes. Yeah, so that's the imprisonment or fine, or cost order, blah 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 blah. I have no power to make some of the orders which a criminal court could make, such as a community order with a curfew requirement or a requirement of unpaid work. So here he's dipping his toe into why he can't do certain actions, and he's bound by the actual, this is more the law, as opposed to the criminal alternative punishments that they have for their societal members. So this is, the law is very tough on contempt of court. This is why you need to not do it, or you need to consider your options very carefully, because contempt of court is pretty brutal. I've already given you an example as to why. And, whatever. And here the judge is faced with a woman, and the woman has done something that's in breach of her order, apparently. And because of that, now she's black and white of it, if you like, is she's in contempt of court. And the judge is like, oh crap, I have to send a woman to prison. That's not fun. No judge likes doing that, believe it or not. It's not really a suitable place for women to be sent to prison. But thankfully they have their own prisons where they obviously have women's prisons as opposed to men's prisons, or mixed prisons for that reason. And so he's with a heavy heart. I think he even says, I need to assess the seriousness of your offending, which means I need to consider the harm caused and your culpability on your part. Oh, here we are, look. If a suspended sentence is imposed in criminal proceedings before a Crown Court and the individual concerned subsequently commits another offence, the law requires the court to activate the suspended sentence in whole or part, unless it considers it unjust to do so. That is provided for by the Criminal Justice Act. There has been a discussion between the council and the bench today about whether that principle applies to the present circumstances. Councils are agreed, and I accept that those provisions are for criminal law and not applicable in this case. So the judge is looking for a more lenient punishment, but they're all saying, sorry mate, the law's the law. This isn't a criminal matter, this is a civil matter. If you take the piss in the law, then you get punished. And here finally, so he asked the accused to stand up, or the guilty party. Would you please stand up? So with regret, so this is a judge saying, with regret, the sentence will be one of immediate imprisonment of a period of 12 weeks. In addition, I order you to pay the applicant's costs of the application to be assessed on the standard basis. Unless you are released earlier on home detention curfew or some other early release scheme, you will serve half your period in custody, that is to say 6 weeks. You will then be released from custody, and you will be on licence and liable to be recalled to serve the remainder of the sentence in custody if you breach the terms of your licence. So I just thought that was very interesting. It's a good example of contempt of court there, and how the judge is trying to look around saying, look, do I really have to send this woman to prison? And the unfortunate answer is, if you're in contempt of court, it's either a fine or imprisonment. And for some reason they didn't go for the fine this time. Maybe the claimant was pursuing the imprisonment terms, and the judge has to do what the claimant is petitioning the court for, if you like, or asking or requiring of the court. If the claimant isn't asking for a fine but is pursuing imprisonment, then it's not really the judge's, and he's within his rights to do that in this case, then that will go ahead, because it's not really the judge's place to influence what the claimant seeks. What the claimant seeks is up to the claimant to make up his own mind. The judge is in a position where he has to look at the rule book of contempt of court, and he has a very limited scope of what he can do, fine or imprisonment. And if it's a clear breach of contempt of court order or some sort of rules set out by a court, then what are you going to do? You're in breach of it. No one forced you to breach it, and if the evidence is convincing, or in this case you've admitted to it, then you get the book thrown at you. So yeah, bear that in mind with contempt of court. It's a serious matter.